Hey everyone, welcome back to this YouTube channel. Today I'm going to react on Truth About NATO without the USA. Let's begin our reaction and let's check out what this video is all about.
Trump is calling NATO a paper tiger and saying a US exit is beyond reconsideration. Europe refused to support the Iran war. Spain closed its airspace to US planes. Italy blocked US bombers from landing at Sigonella. France banned US resupply flights to Israel. The alliance has never looked this fractured. So if the US walks, what's left? The money. Let's start with the genuinely encouraging part, because Europe has actually been spending seriously. And finally, at the 2025 NATO summit in The Hague, member states agreed to hit 5% of GDP on defense by 2035. That's split into 3.5% for actual military hardware and troops and 1.5% for infrastructure, cyber, and industrial capacity. In 2025, European NATO members hit a record $600 billion in defense spending.
$600 billion? Yeah.
Up nearly 13% in real terms from the year before. Germany alone jumped to $107 billion, a country that was constitutionally and culturally pacifist for 8 decades after World War II. That kind of increase in 1 year is genuinely historic. Poland is already spending close to 5% of GDP on defense, the highest of any NATO member, and has quietly built one of the largest armies in Europe.
Yeah, I know about Poland. They have closed their border and everything.
Just a few years. Notably, Spain opted out of the 5% target entirely, which tells you the commitment isn't uniform. But if the 3.5% core target gets hit broadly across the alliance, European defense spending could reach $850 billion by 2030, roughly where the US baseline sits today. From Washington's perspective, this is actually part of the case for stepping back. Europeans are finally paying their share after decades of leaning on American security guarantees. Whether the timing is smart or reckless is a separate debate, but the financial shift is real. The manpower. European NATO members field about 2.1 million active troops without the US. The numbers on paper are substantial. France, Germany, the UK, Poland, and Italy each have well over 100,000 active personnel. Poland alone has quietly become one of the most heavily armed countries on the continent. The problem is that headcount and actual combat effectiveness aren't the same thing. Europe runs a huge variety of non-interoperable weapon systems across its member states. Different tanks, different artillery, different infantry vehicles, none sharing parts or maintenance protocols across borders. The European Defense Agency's own data shows EU states operate far more incompatible systems than the US military does. That makes joint operations expensive and logistically messy in ways that raw troop numbers don't capture. Europe is also genuinely short on things that make modern warfare actually work. Strategic airlift, the heavy transport planes needed to move large forces quickly over long distances, air-to-air refueling tankers, which determine how far your jets can actually reach, and deep strike capability, the ability to hit targets far behind enemy lines, which the US Air Force has provided to every major NATO operation for 30 years. Analysts at Bruegel and the Kiel Institute calculated that plugging those gaps to credibly deter Russia by 2027 would need an immediate $270 billion annually and 300,000 additional combat-ready troops. Not by 2035, right now. That's the honest short-term picture, even if the long-term trend is heading the right way. Command and control. Probably the least talked about gap and the most dangerous one. NATO's entire command structure runs on American systems. Intelligence networks, satellite communication, surveillance, targeting data. Almost all of it US owned. Without that backbone, European multinational forces simply can't fight as a unified army. Defense analysts describe the existing workarounds as kludged together solutions, a polite way of saying nobody expects them to hold under real wartime pressure. The US is
obviously, when you have so many differences in your equipment, in your motive, then obviously how you can fight
already stepping back here. In early 2026, it handed two major NATO headquarters, Joint Force Command Naples and Joint Force Command Norfolk, to European officers. There are serious discussions about appointing Britain's Admiral Sir Tony Ratican as Supreme Allied Commander Europe, replacing U.S. Army General Christopher Cavoli. Supporters say it's healthy and long overdue. The counter-argument is straightforward. The command is only as good as the intelligence and systems feeding into it, and most of those are still American. Both points are fair. The nuclear question. For 77 years, Europe's security rested on one simple guarantee. Attack a NATO member and you're risking nuclear war with America. That kept the peace on the continent longer than any period in modern history. If the US leaves, that guarantee goes. But Europe isn't standing still. On March 2nd, 2026, Macron announced what he's calling dissuasion avancée, forward deterrence, standing in front of a nuclear submarine at France's Ile-Longue naval base. The idea is that France extends its nuclear umbrella to cover Germany, Belgium, and Poland. Those countries contribute to conventional support roles like early warning and air defense, while Paris keeps sole control over the nuclear trigger and all escalation decisions. France and the UK have also formalized joint nuclear submarine patrols and shared research, a two-country European deterrent that didn't formally exist a year ago. Whether it actually works comes down to one thing. Does Russia believe France would use nuclear weapons to defend Warsaw or Tallinn? A French president deciding whether to risk Paris getting hit to protect Riga is a very different call than the one Washington has historically been willing to make. That's not a knock on France, it's just the cold logic of deterrence. A European nuclear umbrella is better than nothing. Whether it's equivalent to the American one is a much harder question. What the US actually loses. Leaving NATO has a real upside on paper. Stationing over 100,000 troops in Europe is expensive. Redirecting those resources toward the Indo-Pacific, which the US's own 2026 National Defense Strategy names as the top strategic priority, is a coherent argument. And if Europe genuinely hits 5% of GDP on defense, the decades-long burden-sharing complaint largely goes away. The problem is what gets lost in practice. Europe isn't just a defensive obligation. It's the physical infrastructure that makes the US a global military power. Ramstein Air Base in Germany is currently being used to coordinate drone operations against Iran. Satellite relays and data connections run through it because direct control from the US would simply...
Both are like intertwined. If like US stop protecting Europe, then it loses bases, the whatever the infrastructure they have in Europe.
Slow, lose it, and those operations become significantly harder to run from anywhere else.
Okay.
Aviano Air Base in Italy is the only US fighter base south of the Alps, recently upgraded to project forces rapidly into the Mediterranean. Naval Station Rota in Spain handles ballistic missile defense and marine staging for the entire Atlantic. Retired US generals have said plainly that losing these bases drops America from a global superpower to a regional one. It's not a political argument, it's logistics. Intelligence is the other side of it. European SIGINT and human intelligence networks give the US its picture of Russian naval movements in the Atlantic, terrorism networks across Africa, and threats across Eurasia. US collection capabilities are impressive, but not complete. And losing European partners leaves real blind spots that are hard to fill. Ukraine, Russia, and what comes next. Russia has been fighting in Ukraine for 5 years. It holds about 20% of Ukrainian territory and gains somewhere between 50 and 230 feet per day, essentially frozen into drone-saturated trench warfare. It's taken between 1.1 and 1.4 million casualties to get there. Technically winning, but slowly, and at a cost that would have broken most countries. US support, financial aid, intelligence, logistics is central to Ukraine's ability to keep fighting. Pull that out and Europe would need to absorb the entire burden alone, while simultaneously trying to deter Russia on its own eastern flank. with all the gaps already described. Ukraine's spy chief and multiple Western intelligence assessments point to 2027 as the year Russia could be ready to test NATO's eastern flank directly. That's not a distant scenario. It's worth saying on the other side, this exact pressure is what finally pushed Europe to rearm. Countries that resisted defense spending for decades are now moving fast because the alternative is genuinely existential. The threat Washington spent years warning about has done more to change European defense budgets than decades of diplomatic pressure ever managed. The signal to everyone else. Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines are watching closely. If the US walks away from 31 treaty-bound democracies over a disagreement, every security commitment in the Pacific immediately means less. Japan is already reading the room, deploying long-range missiles to its southwestern islands to build independent strike capability against China. When allies start quietly building the capacity to operate without you, that says something. The bottom line. A NATO without the US is weaker now and potentially viable later, but that gap is exactly when Europe is most exposed, and it lines up almost perfectly with when Russia might be most tempted to move. And for the US, walking away isn't just a budget call. It means giving up the infrastructure that makes American military power work everywhere else on the planet. If you want to know whether we're watching the start of World War III, check out.
Okay. So according to me, if I want to deconstruct this, according to me, I think it's lose-lose for both and win-win for both America and UN. Yeah, NATO. Because America, obviously, America is global power because it has global bases. It have bases in countries like Spain, countries like Italy, France. Okay, yeah, that's why he can do long-range actions. Like America is so far and Iran is so far, but still, because of those bases, America can hit Iran, and Iran can't hit America directly on like American land. That give extraordinary power to America. Okay, but then there's also loss. Yeah, everything is like you lose something, you win something. Yeah, so I think America shouldn't leave NATO, but if it does, it also decreases the reliability of other nations like Japan, Philippines. All he mentioned, they all look up to America because America have guaranteed them to secure them. But yeah, in long term, it will decrease America's like dominance, I will say. But yeah, that's my thought, my opinion, or my understanding of the situation. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, and thank you for watching this video. Subscribe to this channel and comment down below if any video you want me to react on. Like this video, guys. See you in the next video.